to India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 87. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
But that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
Today, we are continuing our series on travel show reviews.
Travel shows!
This is our fourth week where we are watching a travel show together but separately and coming together to talk about it. And I think it's important that it's the separate part because on my old podcast, my co-host and I watched an episode of something or a movie every episode.
Yeah.
And we a couple times would had an opportunity to watch something together or would talk about it before podcasting. And we learned nope. No comments before you begin recording.
Really? Oh, really?
Save it
You'd
for
use it up
the
ahead
air.
of time. That's funny.
So
Yeah.
it's nice that it works out for us to just kind of watch it separately and then talk about it together.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's been fun, I think, to
Yeah.
watch some of these shows to give us, like we've said, we haven't really watched a lot of travel shows, and yet we love travel. And so to have an excuse to do that because, this is something I need to do for the podcast. It's been kind of nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It was funny because with today's show, so we watched Gordon Ramsay Uncharted, which
Yes.
I had not even heard of until I saw it pop up on Disney Plus.
And
it
I
was like,
only know because a coworker of mine suggested it. She said,
Oh, nice.
Oh my gosh, there's this new show on Disney Plus and you should totally watch it. So.
Yeah. So that was interesting to not really know much about it going into it. But Daryl is not a big fan of Gordon Ramsay. And so it was funny because I was watching it and he was like, why are you watching this? And I was like, you know why? It's for these reviews. And it's not just trying to watch stuff we like. It's trying to get a variety of exposure to travel shows. And he was like, I know, I'm just giving you a hard time. But it was
Yeah. Well, what's
it was
interesting
different,
about
yeah.
that, though, is, at least for me, what I know Gordon Ramsay from the most is what is it called? Hell's Kitchen, I think, was the show that he
Yes.
did, which I never watched. I just saw the commercials for it however many years ago.
Yeah.
And he was portrayed as this ruthless, mean, just hard person. He would yell at people for doing the
Yeah.
wrong thing in the kitchen. So I was honestly a little, I don't know, not afraid, but I definitely had some
Apprehension.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. Moving into the show of what is this going to be?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's where Daryl was coming from, but I can totally understand that if it was.
Yeah. And I mean, I've never watched anything he's been on, but I've seen ads which have convinced me to not watch anything he's been on because angry people, there's nothing fun about that for me. It just kind of makes me sad or scared. But I have heard that MasterChef Junior is pretty great because he tones it down around the kids. And so then it's still a fun, cooking show without that level of intensity. So, I mean, obviously he's doing it for the cameras and because that's how they've decided to, the angle they've decided to take on his show. But it was funny because it came up a little bit in this show, about him swearing a lot or, different things like that kind of came up, not in the same intensity way or anything, but so that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So this show has only one season has aired and just 6 episodes. And season 2 is supposed to come out this summer and have 7 episodes in it.
So at some point in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you can see it on Disney Plus. I'm not sure. I don't think it's Netflix or Hulu. I think it might just be Disney Plus, but it's a National Geographic show.
Right. And Disney Plus has all the National Geographics. That's why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes
Which
sense.
actually, by the time this episode comes out, I believe at least the first few episodes of season 2 should have aired, if Wikipedia's air date is correct. It has
Yeah.
projected air dates of the first one being June 7th.
Oh, great. Very cool.
So it's not June 7th yet for us right now when we're recording, but when you are all listening to this, it will be at least June 7th because it will be almost the end of June. So,
Yeah. So we watched episodes 4, 5, and 6 of season 1. And as we've been doing with how we've been watching our shows, is I watched an episode from a place that I've been to, and Ryan watched an episode from a place that he's been to, and then we both watched the same episode of a place that neither of us have been to. And then we've been trying to also pick locations that we know less about as well, because we are, I think it's pretty, what would I say, unbalanced, our knowledge of different countries and regions and everything.
Well, and I think too, just because you and I love to find out more about places, and it's a little bit more interesting and exciting if it's someplace that we don't know very much about, because then there's more that we can learn and more ways that we can get excited about traveling.
That's true. And then also I would say that just in some ways, like, I am pretty much like a stereotypical ignorant American when it comes to my knowledge of certain areas of the world, even just like as when we've covered African countries, like, it's shown like how very little I know about that continent. And so I think the same can be said for other regions. And so I am trying to take opportunities to learn more. And even if a show has like a totally like skewed filter or one perspective on it, just to see footage from a place that I haven't seen footage from before, I think is helping me learn more about different areas of the world.
Yeah. So I think you watched episode 4, and since that's the earliest one, why don't you start and tell us what the episode was and what happened and what you think?
So I watched Hawaii's Hana Coast. We have talked about the road to Hana, I think 2 times on this podcast, or maybe the Hana area. Jennifer Stillman talked about the road to Hana as her Wish You Were Here. And then recently Doug Walsh said something about, he was talking about a book he's writing and how he went to Hawaii to study some things. And he went to a pretty remote area, it sounds like. And so this was fun. I've been on the road to Hana, but when I was in 3rd grade. And I've been
really recently.
Yeah. And I've been to the island of Maui since then. So
hold on. Dumb question from someone who has not ever been to Hawaii.
Okay, ask
is
your dumb
Hana
question.
on Maui? Is that what you're telling me?
Hana is on Maui.
Okay, thank you.
And Maui is one of the frequently
Gods
visited
from Moana. Right? The Rock, right? That's what we're talking about?
Yeah,
Maui?
you got it. Yep.
Yeah, great.
Yep, nailed it.
Yes.
Maui is one of the islands that is very frequently heavily touristed. And so but the Hana Coast is, so each island in Hawaii has like a dry side and a rainy side, just because of the weather patterns out there. And so the drier side is where a lot of the very touristy areas are, and a lot of the popular beaches and hotels and, all those things. And then the wetter side is where, like, if you want to go on like a cool waterfall hike, you're going to want to go on that side of the island. And that's obviously true just with any of the islands. And so the road to Hana is a really long road that goes around that like wetter side of the island.
Okay.
And I think is more remote than, your touristy area. So when he does a Hawaii episode, it was much more like the rural parts of the island, which was really cool. So this show, it was hilarious because how it's marketed is like, I mean, the main picture is like this big snake and him and everything. And it's like, called Gordon Ramsay Uncharted. And then like the intro is like intense. And I was like, oh, they're really trying to make this like travel is so intense and everything. And so it was funny because like to me that was like a little like turned me off to it a little bit as far as like, okay, we all need to chill out a little bit.
So it's funny that you mentioned that, because in the very first episode that I watched, even just with the music that they had playing in the background, well, I think one of the notes that I wrote down was, I don't know if you ever watched any of the like early 2000s History Channel documentaries. They had a
No.
lot of ones that were about astronomy, and so I've seen a number of those, and they're all like that. They're super over dramatic and trying to make it a super big deal when you're like, it's actually not that big of a deal. And it had that same vibe to me.
Okay, yeah, and I think it's like they definitely know what they're doing. They definitely know what they're like about and
Yeah.
trying to like capture people right away with that. But it's hilarious because you could take the footage from this show and edit it differently and make a totally different show.
Yeah.
If you had some like sweet ukulele music playing at the start of the Hawaii episode, and then like he has like very cheesy jokes that are not intense at all. And like he doesn't, I mean, he's willing to like do anything in this show. It kind of reminds me of Anthony Bourdain in some ways. But like, I mean, he has these like really stupid dad jokes going on. So like you could take this footage and just go in a totally different direction. But yeah, so the idea of this show is that he's going to be in a location for about a week, it seems like.
Yeah,
and
I think that's right.
that he is going to be exposed to food in the area, from like how they get the food, whether they're like hunting or fishing or foraging or anything, and then like how people typically prepare and eat that food. And then he has a meal that he's going to cook at the end of the week for a group of people. And so everything he is learning about, he's kind of taking these mental notes about how am I going to incorporate this into my feast at the end of the week. And so I like that concept a lot. I like that there's a goal in mind too, and like he's a cook, so it's fun to see him cook, you know. And it's interesting that he is kind of coming up with like how to honor what they do with their food combined with his fun ideas about like, could I take this and take in a different direction? It seems like he kind of does some fun like fusion with that, which I appreciate. So in the Hana Coast episode, he and all of this is very much like off the beaten track as well. And so they do some foraging, they do scuba diving for some seafood. He just sees someone like grilling chickens, and he was like, I know people who spend so much on cooking the perfect chicken. This is way better than that. So that was kind of fun. He tries a fish that he like scuba dives for, that this woman describes as seasoning itself because the fish eats seaweed. And she was like, a lot of times we season food with seaweed, but this fish doesn't really need it because it's already eating it. So that was kind of fun because you know, like flavor of meat, it changes based on what the animal consumes. Like a cow that eats corn is going to be different than a cow that eats grass. And so
sure, but it won't be corn flavored or grass flavored.
But
so
it
won't be
different.
Seaweed seasoned.
Yeah. The idea was like the fish is like extra flavorful and delicious because of the seaweed that it's eating. So that was kind of fun. He goes to this like muddy field where they grow taro that makes something called poi. It's like this like paste that they make out of it.
I've heard of it.
And this farmer was just like such a character and very ridiculous and stuff. So they're like in this muddy field for hours trying to like farm that. And then he goes out with a hunter who they hunt this deer together that's like not native to the islands, because you know there's like all these various species that have been brought into Hawaii. So this one's called access deer, and they're not native there, so they're overgrown, and so then people are like welcome to just hunt them and eat them, which is great. So he does that. He goes to this huge waterfall, just this kind of like on his way to somewhere else. They show this really cool waterfall. So that was kind of fun just to see some waterfalls in Hawaii. There's some amazing ones, and this one was like massive that he went to. he gets to go to this, apparently banana bread is really popular
Oh,
over there.
really?
And so
Huh.
he goes to this place that's like really known for amazing banana bread, and so he gets to make it with them. But it's funny
Hmm.
because he comes up to this woman and like orders some, and she's like, "Well, you're really mean, so I don't really know if I want to give it to you." And this is like from his TV personality that
Oh,
she says
wow.
this. So that was funny because and then he was like, "Well, will you teach me how to make this?" And she was like, "As long as you're not mean to me."
Yeah, I mean, that's reasonable, right?
I know. I was like, I might say the same thing. Like, I don't want anyone
Don't
yelling at
yell at
me.
me. Yeah.
But so it's fun because he gets to make the banana bread with them. And then he goes to a place where breadfruit grows. And there's this guy who like
So
shows him all.
bread grows on trees?
It's a type of fruit, but it's also can be cooked like a vegetable. So it's used in a variety of ways and it's very sweet. I don't know. They didn't really talk about why it's called breadfruit specifically because it doesn't
Okay.
look like bread, but it's a
All
type
right.
of fruit over there that's really interesting. Um, and then, yeah, so then he cooks this meal kind of using all of these different things he's learned about and kind of incorporates his own ideas too. And then all the people who taught him throughout the week and who he was visiting with throughout the week
Mhm.
came to the meal and he fed all of them. And of course they loved it. So yeah, it was really fun. And it was funny because I just don't know if his personality is for me. Like he wasn't mean on this show. I just got
Mm.
a little bored. And it was funny because Daryl was asking me, he was like, "You're pretty bored right now, aren't you?" And I was like, I shouldn't be. Like you described this show and it seems like my jam. And maybe like so I think it's maybe just more the personality and then also the editing. It's an hour-long show. I really think it should be a 30-minute show because I think
Mm.
there are a lot of things that they kind of take too much time on when I felt like they could have cut it down a little bit more. It feels like it lags a little bit, but
Mm.
it was interesting to me because I love food and I love learning about like where does this come from? How do locals cook it? What's a new way to cook it? And and everything. And so that was really fun. And they were cooking over a fire outside, and I've been learning more about cooking over fire because I've done that a lot while camping in the last couple
Mhm.
summers. So that's always fun for me to learn about that more. So yeah, I wasn't very like entertained or excited about it, but it was really interesting to me. And I guess it kept me engaged from that standpoint. But I think in a lot of ways I would compare him to Anthony Bourdain. I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
similarities between this and No Reservations, the show we
Mhm.
watched. But I just enjoy Anthony Bourdain's personality a lot more, I think, than Gordon
Interesting.
Ramsay's. Yeah.
Interesting. All right, Cheryl. So do you feel like this matches your, what was it, third grade experience of being at the road to Hana?
No, it does not. And I've been to Hawaii 3 times, and this the closest that this matches to my experience with Hawaii is one time I went on a hike to a waterfall on the island of Oahu, and we like
Okay.
went over to the rainy side of the island and did a waterfall hike that was like nobody was around and you're in this like tropical forest and find this waterfall, and it was
Mm.
amazing. And that was like the side of the island that they were representing, but pretty much everything I've done when I visited Hawaii is touristy things.
Yeah.
And it was not really, I mean, also I just like I've enjoyed food over there, but I haven't really like tried hard to like learn about local food, or you know what I mean? Like
Mm.
I've eaten what tourists eat when you're over there and everything. And so
Sure.
I've had good food there, but yeah, I think both the setting and what he was doing doesn't really match my experience of Hawaii. But I think I liked seeing what he was doing on Hawaii because it was like, oh, that would be very cool, like to go. Especially nowadays that I'm so into food, it would be very
Yeah.
fun to go and like see how someone over there like fishes for something or cooks a certain type of meat or different things like
Yeah.
that. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, Ryan, which episode did you watch?
So I watched episode 6. So the one we both watched together was 5. So we'll have to come back for that one. And this one was called Alaska's Panhandle. And, even less similar to you, I guess, I have technically been to Alaska. It was a cruise that we went on 20 years ago, I think. Like 2000, 2001. I think it was actually the summer of 2001, I think is when we went. Because it was for my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. And so it was quite a while ago at this point. And I mean, I think technically I was in one of the same places because I think we did stop in Juneau, but that's about it. So I've been to Alaska and it's more or less the same region of Alaska, but that's where the similarities stop, at least as far as what I've seen versus what they did. So it was interesting. There was a hunter in this one as well, which was interesting. And they did a whole hunting thing. And the beginning of this episode just struck me as weird. It had that music, like I mentioned already, that was super over dramatic. And I was like, oh, come on now. You're making this way a much bigger deal than it needs to be. And then he met this chef. I guess it was another chef from Alaska, and they snowshoed up to the top of this kind of not cliff, but like mountaintop-ish area. And then he said, okay, now you have to go walk that way. And he pulled out his backpack and said, here's some different food, like moose jerky, I think was one of the things. But it was just random because it was on the top of this mountain for no apparent reason. And I was very confused.
So they were just trying to figure out an activity for him to do.
I think so.
Then.
But it felt very contrived and didn't feel like it was necessarily connected to anything, which was fine. But it was just a little weird to me. And that's sort of how it started. So that kind of, flavored the whole thing for me a little bit, was it the way it started. Because then he went to this Chimney Rock, which is this really, really tall kind of tower of rock. Think of kind of like off the Oregon coast, how they have the different, and I don't remember what they're called, but the different rocks that have kind of, everything else is eroded away, but they're kind of sitting
like Haystack Rock.
Like Haystack Rock or things like that, except it's much narrower. Think of like just a column. Think of like a big tree, like a sequoia or a redwood or something. So it's big and around, but it's tall. And so that's sort of just what this rock was. And then supposedly at the top, there's this lichen that makes this tea. And so they have to climb up with this rope up to the top. And it's really difficult. And Gordon Ramsay has a difficult time doing it. And they do this whole thing where they're flying around and they're climbing up, and it's like 60 feet tall. And then it's called Old Man's Beard, I guess. And it was this lichen. And they said that it was the only place, it only grew on the top of this stack or whatever. And I was sitting there, I'm like, that doesn't sound right. Like it, I mean, I'm not a lichen expert, but that doesn't see, and they didn't actually, I don't think they even said that it was lichen. I think I looked that up while I was looking. And sure enough, the internet told me that it grows all over the place, which interestingly enough, later in the episode, when he's out hunting, he actually sees it on these other trees and he calls that out. He's like, wait a minute, I didn't have to climb to the top of that thing to get this? And the hunter guy is like, yeah, no, it grows everywhere. I was like, okay, thank you. I appreciate that at least you're acknowledging that. So I'm not really sure what that was, but that part was funny and interesting. But they make this tea out of it. Great. And then they go to Hoona, which is a Tlingit community. And he goes there and talks to the Tlingit elder, which is kind of cool. And his daughter's there. And they talk about how they go seal hunting and what they do with the different parts of the seal meat. And the daughter is braiding seal intestine. So he goes and helps braid seal intestine, which I think is interesting. And then they eat seal bacon, and he gets some seal bacon. And then, this was a part that I liked just because I'm a science person. They had what's called the pluck. They didn't use that term, but it's the trachea and the lungs of the seal. And because they cook all parts of, and they use all parts of the animal, right? And in order to make sure that the lungs aren't super tough, they have to inflate them first. And so they hand it over to Gordon, and he has to put his mouth over the trachea and blow in to inflate the lungs, which I apologize for anyone who's grossed out by it, but I loved it. I thought it was great. I actually, when I taught 8th grade, we did a human body systems unit at the end of the year, and one of my coworkers would get a cow pluck, and we brought that in, and we actually did that same thing for the students, except it had the heart also, so they could see the actual organs. And I didn't put my mouth on the trachea. I got a tube that I put into the trachea, but I would inflate them, and it's super fun. So that was fun for me.
That does sound fun.
And then they go salmon fishing, and I think it's king salmon, and they didn't actually catch anything while they were out there, but they had one in sort of a storage area, and then Gordon cooks it right there on the boat with them, and apparently it's really good. And then they do, I have to, again, I'm a science person, so I'm so sorry. They talk, and they do this a couple of times in the thing, because it's so stark and difficult to survive in the wilderness of Alaska. They talk about survival of the fittest, but they use the term very incorrectly multiple times.
How do they use it?
They say it to mean that the strongest is going to survive, and that's not what survival of the fittest means. We think of fit as in like you're physically fit, but that's not actually what fitness means in an evolutionary way. It's a better way to think of it is they fit their environment.
Oh.
Right. So they're best suited to that environment. It might be that they're strong, but it actually might be that they're fast, or it might be that they camouflage better, or whatever the case may be, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily the strongest individual. So just had to throw that out there. It's not a science show. I get it, but still. Then they go out on another boat out to a glacier, and they harvest ice from a glacier. So not the actual glacier itself, but parts of the glacier that have calved off and that are in the water. So just floating ice. And they pull the boat up, and they kind of hook the floating ice, and then grab it and pull it onto the boat, and then chisel it, and then use that for whatever the drinks were that they're drinking.
Just for fun, or did they say that there was something like unique about it?
They said it's super pure. I'm like, I don't know that it's any more pure than snow, because glaciers are made of snow, and actually glaciers tend to be fairly dirty. So again, it was one of those where okay, it looks very clear.
But maybe like a fun cultural tradition that happens or something.
It could be. They weren't. Yeah, I don't know.
Interesting.
I mean,
it's funny, when I was in Alaska, my family, we went on a cruise and we went inland, but I think it was on the cruise that they were talking about the glaciers, and they said there's a lot of silt in glaciers.
Yeah.
And so, they're really dirty. Yeah. And so they said it's hilarious when you see bottled water advertised as glacier water, saying like, this is so pure, it's from a glacier, because they're like, actually, you wouldn't want to drink glacier water. So maybe, I mean, it's just probably not true, and bottled water says that, but it was just kind of funny. So
For the record, actually, I have drank. I don't know how to conjugate that. Have drunk from a glacier when I was in Iceland. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
The top of the glacier, and it, it's melting, and I mean, I might have gotten a little grit in my mouth when I did it, but it is really good. I mean, I don't know that it's better than Seattle tap water, because we have great tap water here too.
Yeah.
But it was good. So anyway, then they go on and they go hunting for grouse, which I had never heard of before.
Yeah, I know about them from when I lived in Eastern Washington. There were just grouse flying around. One time, one scared me a lot when I was on a hike, and it came out and was flapping its wings at me and trying to be all defensive, and it freaked me out.
So there you go. So they went hunting for grouse, and then they, just like with what you described, then at the very end, he's making this meal for all the different people that he'd met, but it's almost like a competition, because the other chef that he met originally is also making a meal. And so it felt like they were trying to make it. Well, so here's the thing. I had the sense that it was a competition, because but they were sort of helping each other out a little bit, kind of. They were talking to each other, and then the guests arrived, and then they put it all out there, but they bring their own stuff out, and then it's just, what did you guys think? And that was it. So it felt
Yeah.
like it was sort of a competition, but not really a competition. So again, it was just a little odd to me, but it's fine. I will say that I much appreciated Gordon Ramsay's personality compared to what I
Mm.
expected it to be.
Mm,
Right.
mhm,
And he
mhm.
seemed like, the word that I would use is actually very soft or
Yes.
tender was the
Yes.
personality that at least I saw in the episodes that I watched, which
Yes.
was not what I would have expected based on the Hell's Kitchen type of reputation and things. And so I found that very interesting and a little refreshing that he wasn't this
Mhm.
mean, angry person all the time. And again, I
Yeah.
haven't seen Hell's Kitchen, and maybe he's actually only yells a couple of times, and that's just what they put in the, in the promos. I don't know, but I did find that
Yeah.
interesting.
I appreciated that a lot, that he seemed like, okay, this is a good travel show person to have, as far as like on a travel show, you want someone to come in and like, if they're going to have them interact with locals, like be respectful, be a good learner,
Yeah.
like things like that. And I think he did that well. And then I think once I got over like, okay, he's not just an angry person, I actually was just a little bored by him, but it was also like, I
Yeah.
thought he did a good job. And I thought he was like, very sweet to the people he interacted with and all those things. So,
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of bored. I don't know if bored is the right word. I wasn't super engaged, I think.
yeah.
But for me, and this is going to be a familiar tone, it was a food show that just happened to also have travel. And I'm not interested by the food. The food is not what gets me interested. And so it was interesting to hear you say that you are a foodie and that you think that it should have interested you, but it still didn't.
Yeah. I think it just, the editing and the personality, I think to me were the things where they felt a little lacking to me. And I think the content was very interesting and should have engaged me more than it did. But I just don't know if it was the most amazingly edited show. And it really should not be an hour long. It should be 30 minutes. So yeah. So I'm curious to ask you then, based on what you saw of this show, was it more or less interesting? Like the aspects of just any of the content, what they showed, the information they provided, what you got to see, was it more or less interesting than Anthony Bourdain's show?
So I think on one level I was less engaged, but on another level, I feel like I was able to get a better sense of the location.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, there was food, but it didn't seem like everything revolved around the cooking of the food. There were enough things that were related to where the food came from, why the food was used, actually getting it, like going out and doing the hunting and some of those things, that there was a little bit more to it, I think, than what I remember from Anthony Bourdain, at least from what I saw. I think, unlike you, I think I actually prefer Gordon Ramsay's personality to Anthony Bourdain's personality. So I think that's
Did you like the
component of it,
cheesy
too.
jokes?
I don't remember noticing the cheesy jokes.
Oh, I wrote a few down because I rolled my eyes at them.
I do like a good cheesy pun. So I might have enjoyed those.
A cheesy pun is good. Yeah, this was more just like, I don't know, like he was trying to be funny. I see. Okay, watching this show, and then we need to get to our episode we watched together. But watching this show, I did feel like you might appreciate it more because they showed like the foraging and things like that. So like, I think there's a piece of a science element in there, even and then if it goes back to being a food thing, it's like there's this thing that grows this way, or things like that.
The actual eating and or making of the food was primarily at the end. At least in the episodes that I watched. Like there was a little bit, like he did cook the salmon on the boat, and there were a few other pieces like that throughout, but it wasn't Like with Anthony Bourdain, it felt like going from cooking this one meal to then now cooking this next meal and then cooking this other meal. And again, that's my perception. I'm sure it wasn't really that much, but in comparison, it felt much more about the actual cooking of the food. And this one was more about the where it came from and then the eating of the food.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again,
so I
don't
could
have a wide
see you.
range,
I could
but-
see you enjoying that aspect more, that you got
Yeah.
to see like where it came from and things
Yeah.
like that. So you already kind of addressed that this did not match your experience in this location.
I mean, not really, but kind of. Like we did go when we were on the cruise. We did go into a glacier. We went into Glacier Bay, and so seeing that, like that stuff, did look the same or similar. But I didn't go snowshoeing, and he was there in possibly the winter, but definitely not the summer. Whereas I went in the summer, so a lot of those things were different. So yeah, it wasn't super similar, but I enjoyed the part of Alaska that they showed.
Cool. Nice. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So then we watched an episode together. We watched an episode on
Together apart.
Laos. Yes, together apart. On Laos.
Laos. Yes.
Season 1, episode 5, called The Mighty Mekong of Laos.
Mm-hmm.
And this was so interesting. And in fact, actually, one thing I was going to mention as you were talking about seeing more of the location than in Anthony Bourdain's show was, I think this show has really good cinematography. I think that's a strength of it, is clearly they sent some really good cameramen out there. And so
well, I think
I enjoyed that a lot.
The style of Anthony Bourdain's show is much more kind of the handheld camera, like live, we're kind of capturing it as it happens sort of a thing. Whereas they're much more intentional is the wrong word, but like structured shots, established shots. They're on tripods. They've been pre-planned. You can tell that they picked that they're going to shoot
had
it from here.
drones.
Yeah, a lot of drone shots, things like that. So it definitely does have a different cinematograph fact. I can't say that word. Cinematographic style.
Cinematographic.
Yeah, sure. Whatever that word is. That's what it has.
Yeah, I think Anthony Bourdain's is more close up shots and more gritty.
Yep.
And this show, it was more like sweeping shots of an area, or really like capturing the beauty of the area a lot, I think. And so and I think you did get to see more in this, and it was all outdoors, and I don't know if all of these are like it, but in both episodes I watched, they were even cooking the entire meal outside. How about the Alaska one? Were they cooking outside or inside?
Yes. Yep, they were cooking outside.
Okay, yeah. So like it's just, you get to see the outdoors of these locations a lot because everything they're doing is outdoors. And so I think you do get to see more. So let's talk about the Laos episode. I mean, I know hardly anything about this country, and so that was really interesting. I mean, I couldn't even tell you, like, are they like a developing country, or I just don't know anything. So it's interesting because even in this episode, he talked about how they only got electricity 10 years ago. Didn't know that. So that was interesting to talk about, like, how that impacts how they cook and everything. So we got to see him do some fishing on like the side of this like rocky
So I have
area.
to say, so it was, I don't remember how to pronounce it. Coney Falls. I don't
something
remember
like that.
Khone, which is the widest waterfall in the world. It looked amazing. It was super cool. It's not super tall, but it's very wide, and it kind of curves a little bit. And so they're just downstream from the waterfall. And there's this a local Lao who has this net that has, weights on the side and on the four corners, and just throws it out and lets it kind of gather up to just kind of go fishing. And I thought that was kind of cool. I don't want to do that kind of fishing personally, but it was interesting to see that. And yeah, just kind of the literally on the side rocks, not of the waterfall. Like I said, just downstream from where the waterfall is, but you can hear the waterfall. You can see it right there. It was just very interesting.
Yeah. I'm reading that it's nearly double the volume of Niagara Falls.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's huge. He asked several times, is this safe?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that was fun.
And he didn't think that it
so
was
his
safe.
mission in this episode is to cook for monks in a temple at the end of the episode. So it's a little different than these other two we watched where he cooks for the people that showed him around.
Right.
So that was interesting that they talked about that people cook for monks all the time just as a way to get good karma. And I'm assuming also just to be able to provide for them. And so that was, so that's kind of his goal with this one. So we see him in a field searching out bugs that they call toe biters.
Yep, it's a rice field.
It reminded me of, I worked at a camp and some of my staff who were lifeguards complained about toe biters in our swimming pool. And I think there's this like big kind of beetle that apparently bit people's toes a lot, that they were like, can we do anything about the toe biters? And so I had like a camp flashback when they were looking for those, and he picks one up and like throws it away because it hurt him.
Bites him.
So,
Yeah.
On a river, they fish. He goes like diving for snails.
Yep.
And then he gets to try those right away. And it is fun how often in the show he tries something almost immediately after catching it. They prepare it however they eat it, and he just tries it right away, which is really fun to see. Kind of that like, he's eating these really fresh things and just eating it however people eat it.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I appreciated about that particular scene, because they're sitting kind of around sort of a campfire type place when they're cooking the toe biters and the snails and stuff, is when he eats them and he talks about how he really likes them and thinks that they taste good. You can see on the faces of that family how much that validates them. Right. And just that they're super proud that he came and he did all this stuff, and then they made food for him and he likes it and enjoys it.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated just seeing that on their faces. That was really kind of a cool
that
moment,
was very sweet. I also liked in that scene that he was talking about how he's had snails before. He's had escargot and it's all fancy and everything, and this was a very different snail experience for him that he was very clearly nervous and uncomfortable about, and then really enjoyed it. So that was cool. I think about this show, what I'm liking is that he's trying a lot of foods that a lot of people would be very uncomfortable to try, especially in this episode. But it's not a like shock and awe type of like, can you watch this person eat this frog? Because I'm not such a fan of, I haven't even watched many shows like that, but I've seen clips of shows where it's like people are just eating like outrageous things, but it's things that people eat in other cultures. And I think it's nice to show it in a respectful light. And that they talk about in this episode several times that like people in this country are generally poor. And so they need to eat anything they can. And that, like this woman at one point, she said, we eat everything in Laos. And they eat all these plants that he didn't know were edible, and they eat these animals. Just like they need to eat, and so they do, and they make it delicious. So that was fun that it was a very respectful light, and I really appreciated that a lot.
Then there's the random, we're going to kayak the Spirit Trap for no apparent reason.
Yeah, this was, again, I think in the show, the producers want him to do some sort of intense outdoor activity adventure with some like very flimsy reason attached to it. This was like, this is the shortcut to the forest that you're going to. He's like, yeah, we'll take the shortcut. And he's like, I didn't know that this was the shortcut, when like obviously he knew that this was the shortcut.
Well,
so
and they mentioned it was something like a 2-hour drive to get there, or they could take this little thing, and they do this whole deal about all the prep and getting ready, and you're going to be in the rapids or whatever. And then it's like a 30-second segment and he's there. I was like, I don't feel like that's going to the same place as this 2-hour drive.
I know,
God,
that was
that-
so funny. Yeah, it was like,
it was
I think it's funny because, again, I'm really comparing this to Anthony Bourdain's show a lot, but he did touristy things in that show. Like,
Sure.
he did several of them, but I think I appreciated that they didn't try to work it into the storyline. They were just like, I'm gonna go try this weird thing where we drive on ice, and it wasn't like, because
Right.
that's how we get to the restaurant. It was like, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna try it. And so I think it's like, I don't need everything in this show to be like about food or to have a logical reason. Like in a travel show, there's plenty of things that you just do because you do it, or you do it
Yeah.
because this is a thing that the people do. So I think like I didn't need that in the storyline,
Yeah.
and like, especially that he repeated several times, like, I didn't know that this was the shortcut. It was
Yeah.
like, just say that you're going kayaking down this crazy river. Like, just do it. It's fun. Okay. Like, and it was fun to watch that and everything.
Oh,
but,
I didn't care at all. I felt like it was in there for no reason. It didn't
it was
help
a
anything.
filler. Yeah.
It was, well, but it wasn't even like, this is a thing that people do. It's just he was doing it.
That's true, because they didn't show like traditional kayaks used there or like any locals doing
Well, and
it.
because the guide was, where was he from? Was he from New Zealand?
Yeah, he was a Caucasian person with
Yeah.
some sort of a totally different accent. Yeah.
And I don't,
Yeah.
the whole thing just felt out
It
of
was very
place
silly.
and I
Yeah.
didn't understand it. But whatever. So he did that. Great. Good for him.
But then it was interesting. They go into this forest and they forage for all sorts of things. And he's like,
Mhm.
you take a couple steps and there are edible things just all around you. So they try this leaf that kind of is like a bay leaf. They try this like plant that is very, very spiky. And then they just like shuck it and eat it. And it's amazing. And then they have ant larvae, which
Mhm.
I think that type of scene in this show I like, where it's like, no, this is a real thing that we put in our food, and also let's have him try to get these ants out of this nest that's like up in a tree and everything.
Yeah.
Like,
that one
that's,
didn't feel forced.
I liked those hijinks, where
Yeah.
he's like, actually it was delicious when they add it to the cooking and everything. So
Yep.
but the nest was very interesting that the ants made, like, they weave leaves together and it was
Mhm.
beautiful. So
Mhm.
that was pretty cool.
What did you think of the marinated gecko whiskey?
Oh my goodness. First of all, I love, so this woman takes him to try this type of liquor, and then he tries,
Moonshine.
yeah, he tries this moonshine, and then he tries one that's had a gecko marinating in it. And he likes that one more, which I also appreciated. And it was
Yeah.
like, hey, they figured something out that makes it better. Like, and I think he was being honest with saying that
Yeah.
it was better. But it was hilarious because this woman he was drinking with like could take it way better than he could take it. So I thought that was
Yeah.
pretty fun. But yeah, there's like
Yeah.
pulled out this like gecko from it and everything.
a
And yeah,
pickled
that was,
gecko or
yeah.
whatever,
And that was where he said like those are like pets in other places, and she was like, yeah, we eat everything here. So
Yep. Yep.
And then he goes, they go shopping for some fish, and he gets some beautiful catfish. Oh my goodness. Like, those looked like gorgeous pieces of fish, man. And they were
Okay.
like $5. And I was so jealous
I
of
don't
that
feel
fish
like
market.
catfish are beautiful, but great.
I mean, it looked beautiful to eat. I guess that type of
Okay.
beautiful. I consider a lot of food to be beautiful. So
That doesn't surprise me, Cheryl.
And then they go shopping at the market, and I loved it. And they
I
just
figured
like,
you probably would.
they try different things. They go to different areas. They tried something that he was like, oh yeah, this makes your head fuzzy. And he was like, wait, hold on, what? And he's like, yeah, well, there's tobacco in it. And it was like, got it. That's why.
Yep.
So
And he tried it and didn't like it and was very honest that he didn't like it, which I also
here was one of
appreciated.
his jokes. I would pick it up again if it were so I could throw it in the trash.
And you didn't like that?
I was
bothered you?
just like,
I feel like that's something I would say.
It felt so forced to me. I don't know. Maybe it's because it was in the narration too. I don't know. But
Yeah, sure.
sometimes TV show narration on shows like this are
Yes.
something special.
Yes. And it definitely does have that I don't even know, but there is a certain vibe the type of narration, and maybe it's even just the way he delivers it, it does feel very scripted and very forced.
Maybe that's what I think when I think of personality as the narration, because he's fine. Again, that goes back to the editing then.
Right.
That they chose to have him narrate it the way in the style that they did. I'm not a big fan of that aspect because actually what he says in person is great. Yeah.
Okay.
Different
That
editing.
makes sense.
I'm going to spend some time re-editing this show. So.
Okay. Well, see, and just as my notes stopped at this point.
Oh.
Because I had lost enough interest, I think.
Mm.
Because it was just like I wrote market to shop for monk meal.
So then they go to the monastery to cook. And this is where I don't think that he and the local cook, I don't think they're in a competition, but I think they set it up to make it look like a competition.
Right.
Because they're working on the same meal together.
Well,
and this
it's
is
not
where
the
like
same meal because they have different dishes.
Oh, okay, different dishes, but like they're presenting the same meal, you know, like, and so they're kind of even doing different parts of the cooking, but they set up like tables like facing each other where it looks like a competition. And this is where I turned to Daryl and said, I just want to see a cooking show where they're not stressed about time, because I don't know. I guess timing is a part of cooking. Like when I think about when I cook, like I like to make eggs Benedict. And whenever I make eggs Benedict, it really does come down to timing, and it does get a little stressful about like, I need to have this, like I need to have the toast and the bacon done so I can put the egg on top of it because the egg is really fragile. So like there are aspects of cooking in real life where it does come down to time, or if you have company coming over or whatever. But like I just don't feel it in that way. And I think it's like in food shows, I think they try to make it as like a point of conflict where there wouldn't normally be conflict if you're just watching people cook. And so they need to like add some sort of drama of like, and I only had 5 minutes left, because he keeps talking about how like they're running out of time.
Yep.
And my thought is, well, then start earlier.
Yep.
Like you could, but I think they do it like to make, as an audience member, to like care more about like, is he gonna make it in time for the monk meal? And so yeah, it just like but I don't care about that aspect of it. You know, I don't need him to be rushing, and that's not why I want to see. Like I liked seeing him prepare the meal. It was probably one of my favorite parts of the show. But but like
the part where I stopped taking notes.
I don't
so
need
bored.
him to be rushing for me to be interested in it. So
again,
I think
it's part of that contrivedness that it sort of is feeling.
Yeah, it's like, well, then tell your producer to have them schedule you there earlier if you don't have enough time. Like that's how I feel about it. So it's just very funny.
I mean, I will say this is not related to travel, but it is related to food, so you might appreciate it. There are a few cooking shows, baking shows that I actually enjoy watching, and they do involve time. And they're very different. One of them is the Great British Baking Show, because it's amazing. And there is time on that one, but it's lovely. And then the other one, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I don't know if you like it, but it's my kind of cooking show. It's called Nailed It.
I love that show.
On Netflix. And
I love Nicole Byer, the host. I love her a lot.
Oh, see, I don't love her.
I've heard her on a lot of podcasts, and I loved her on them, and then watched that show. And yeah. I
had to warm up to her because she's a little much sometimes. But I just love the. It's like if I were to be on a cooking show. And so like I identify with it. And it's not forced, it's not fake, it's not all these people doing things that I could never ever do even if I wanted to. It's real world. And that's what I love.
Well, and I love that like it's a show that came out of the idea of like Pinterest fails, and that's very delightful. Yeah, because we've all lived that, and you're just like, what kind of shiny life do you live
all the time.
where you can and it's so it's, and then what I love about Nailed It as well is that she as a host laughs along with them and
Oh,
like
yeah.
knows it's ridiculous.
Yep.
Everyone making that show knows
Yep.
that like they're not going to achieve these things and it's going
Yep.
to look awful, and that's the point.
That's
and
the
so
whole
they
point.
just like
Yep.
laugh along with it, and it's
Yep.
so fun. I know, I
Yep.
love that show.
Anyway,
yeah.
that has nothing to do with what we're
Yes.
doing right now.
That
but
is a
it
reason
just
to have
reminded me.
time on it. It's like
Yes.
that's part of the challenge of it. But
Yes.
for this,
But
his
since it
challenge,
wasn't really a challenge,
yes,
and again, it feels like maybe it's trying to be a competition, but it's a competition after the fact as opposed to a
Yes.
competition in the actual moment.
Yeah, well, and the challenge is, can he cook these things that he learned about in a way that locals will like them?
Yeah.
You know, like, can he live up to that standard that he learned about? Can he incorporate
Right.
these ingredients in a way that's going to be good? And that's an interesting challenge. Just let that be it, you know, as far
Yeah.
as I'm concerned. So this one really stressed it more, and they kept talking about how the monks have a particular time of day they eat, and is he going to make it in time and whatever. So that was very silly, but I liked watching them cook. Again, they cooked outside. He had to wash a pot, and he asked the other chef, like, what do I do? And he was like, well, we go wash in the river. And so he's like, oh, okay. So that was cool. Just like that he's cooking as people cook there.
Yeah.
I liked that a lot. And then here's my final cheesy line I wrote down, again from the narration, not something he said in person. Oh, so then they give the monks the food, and the monks are quiet while they eat because they eat in silence. But then afterwards, they said that it was good, essentially. He said, watching the monks eat is a bit spiritual. And then he said something else about it being spiritual. And then he said, hopefully they won't condemn me to washing dishes in Hell's Kitchen for eternity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my reaction too.
I mean, I think I just, I think I just dismissed it as that's dumb. And
I
moved on.
think there
But I
were
don't think that's supposed
so
to be a
many
joke.
lines like that I was just like, bleh.
But see, I don't think, okay, I think this is the thing. I don't see that as being a joke. I didn't feel like they were trying to be funny. It just was cheesy. And I feel like the show was very cheesy in a lot of the narration and whatever that copy was that he was reading.
Yeah.
I think that's the case. But you originally mentioned that it was, you know, very bad humor. And maybe there was some of that in there too. But I think in my brain, I just lumped it all together as just being kind of cheesy, contrived.
Yeah, I think that was just the feel of it that I didn't appreciate as much, was that
Which is
type
reasonable.
of humor. And then also, I think just someone like, this really dumb joke combined with like him having a spiritual experience feels like, well, which was it? you know, like, are you making a joke or was it actually a spiritual experience for you? And so, but overall, like, I mean, I think that it was like, I feel like I learned some cool things about these places and the foods that they make and everything. And that was fun. And I love watching people cook. And so that was really fun for me too. So, yeah. So, Ryan.
Cheryl.
We have some follow-up questions for
We
each
do?
other.
Wow.
So our first one is based on the title of our podcast, Take Me With You.
Uh-huh.
If you could take yourself to just one thing in this Laos episode, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think for me, I would want to see that waterfall. I think that was the part that was the most interesting to me. And it opens with that, which I think is really cool and had me much more interested from the beginning. I think that was the part that was interesting because, again, the food doesn't do it for me just in general. And so most of the rest of that was, okay, no big deal. But the waterfall I thought was really cool. What about for you?
Gosh, I think it's between the forest and the market. I'm trying to think about which one. I liked them both.
Farket. The Morist.
Those are both good portmanteaus. It works very nicely either way. Yeah, I thought that forest was really cool. The idea of going on a nature walk that includes eating the things around you does sound very fun to me with someone who knows what they're doing. But then I love a market. Love
You
a
do
market
love
where
a
locals
market.
shop. So it's one of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did this episode make you want to go to Laos more than before watching the episode?
That's a tricky one to answer for me. On one level, I would say yes, because I didn't know a whole lot about Laos before. And it was helpful to be able to see parts of the country, and there are some cool things there. However, most of what they did in the episode are not things that I'm interested in doing or seeing. So beyond the waterfall, I don't know that there's much else that we saw in this episode that seemed like something that I would want to spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time traveling to go and see. So I don't. So more than before, yes, because I know more about it. But I also found myself, as I was watching the episode, thinking, I don't know that I need to go to Laos. Like, I'm interested in learning more about it, but I don't know that it's a place that is on my list that I really want to travel to. What about you?
I think more than before watching it. Yeah, I think so. I think it would need to be under specific conditions. Like, it's not very high on my list. I think I would want to go if I were with a local. You know, I think it's not a place where I would feel like, as an American tourist, I would just want to go and visit on my own. But I think if I knew someone who knew the area or lived in the area or something like that, it would be a really fascinating place to visit. So I think it would just have to be under those circumstances, though, for me.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah. And based on your viewing of this show overall, would you want to travel with Gordon Ramsay?
I think I could travel with Gordon Ramsay as long as, he wasn't narrating the cheesy copy, right? But just by looking at him as a person from what we saw in the show, he seems like a very pleasant man, and he engages really well with the local people that he's around. I think he's incredibly respectful, and I could see myself traveling with him, I think, if I needed to. What about
Interesting
you, Cheryl?
that I said, would you want to? And you said, I think I could.
Yeah, because I don't think it's like, oh my gosh. So we last week, I believe, talked about the episode with Richard Ayoade, and I would totally hands down travel with him. Like, no question. I would love that. It would be hilarious. And I definitely would not want to travel with Anthony Bourdain based on what we've seen. His style is not my style on a lot of levels. And so I don't have any interest there. And I feel like Gordon Ramsay is in the middle. So I'm not like chomping at the bit. Yes, I would love to. That would be the most fun thing ever. But I also think that, I think that there are some things that are in line and that I could have a good time traveling with him.
I would put him in the middle of Rick Steves and Anthony Bourdain, actually.
Okay. What do you mean?
Because I think that this kind of is a mashup of those two more.
Oh, interesting. What makes you say that?
I think that he and Anthony Bourdain have some similar styles, but he is not as I don't want to say adventure seeking necessarily, but yeah, he seems more like mellow and calm, I guess. He seems respectful of the culture in a very similar way to Rick Steves. He's just on a very different show than Rick Steves' show.
Yeah.
But I think the way he approaches the culture has a similar feeling to the one I get from Rick Steves.
Yeah, I could see. I didn't make that connection myself, but I could see that. It does have more of that kind of mellow, even keel sort of feeling
learner.
mood.
He has a similar style of wanting to learn.
Yeah.
I think I would want to travel with him. I can tell that he on his own isn't trying to kayak super dangerous rivers. Like, he's doing it for the show.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think what he would want in like a trip, I think might be similar to me. He's not trying to do all the crazy stuff, but he wants to learn about the food. So like
Yeah.
right there with you, buddy. So yeah. I would take a trip with him.
Cool. All right. Well, go ahead and sign up. That's the way it works, right?
Yes.
Yep.
One, please.
All right. We're going to go ahead and move into the last segment of our podcast now, Cheryl. We're going to talk about Wish You'd Stay Home.
Yay!
Yay! Because while we're recording, we are still under stay home orders. Hopefully, by the time this comes out, things will start being lifted, at least in our state. I know there are places around us that are starting to lift requirements. As a matter of fact, I just saw a notification earlier today while I was working and haven't looked at it yet. But apparently, Disney World has announced a reopening date.
Oh, interesting.
I haven't heard anything about Disneyland, but Disney World apparently has. So things are starting to open, but in the meantime, we are still at home and we're not doing the travel that we might like to do. So if we're still at home, we're going to highlight what's a way that we can experience things that aren't at home while still being at home. Kind of like a travel attraction, but from home. So Cheryl, what would you like to do for your Wish You'd Stay Home this week?
Well, mine doesn't work quite as well with the way you phrased it this week, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay, great.
I started another Instagram account.
Wait, another one?
Well, last week I talked about my Papyrus account.
Yeah.
Which is all about the font Papyrus and how much I hate it.
By the way, well,
Yes.
here you go ahead and then I'll add. You go ahead.
Okay. Well, apparently one new Instagram account was not enough. And so
Doesn't surprise me. You got to have new things.
Gotta have new things, but also realize so this one is about food.
But you don't like food.
But because I love it. That's why.
Oh.
It's
called
called Real Tasty. RYL Tasty.
Uh-huh.
Because it's an Instagram account for my husband and I, and we are Cheryl and Daryl. So both of our names end in RYL. So that is our name together that we use for things. So then Real Tasty. I believe it has it. Yeah. RYL.tasty. Sometimes I post photos of my cooking, and I did recently, and a lot of people wanted more. But I figured, well, if I post about it, say every day, that's too much for my personal Instagram account, I think. So I thought, let's just do one that's just about the food, and then people who are interested can follow that. But I cook from scratch almost daily and love it. And also I've been playing more with presentation when I cook things as well. And so, because sometimes food photos are not great. So I'm also with this trying to make, my presentation game up a little bit more. And so the idea with it is also just I don't want a second podcast right now. So I'm not going to start a cooking podcast.
Are you sure?
And I'm kind of sure. And I don't really want a YouTube channel. All of that is way too high of a commitment level for me. And I'm just not a blogger because I'm not a writer. So then it was I'm just going to do an Instagram then. And then if I want to do videos on it at some point, because I would love to show how I cook certain things, but I'm just starting with pictures of the food I cook. So follow it if you like food pictures, and maybe eventually tips or things like that will come too, because I do like sharing what I've learned about cooking. So Yep. What were you going to say?
So, because I hadn't put together what the new Instagram account was, so I was going to wait to see what it was. So today, as a matter of fact, I was working on modifying a PowerPoint for my students that I had gotten one from another teacher, and then I was tweaking it. And I very quickly discovered that, first of all, the font choices were not consistent from slide to slide, nor were the colors.
No.
But one of the fonts that was used fairly heavily throughout the PowerPoint was Comic Sans. So I spent probably longer than I should have getting rid of Comic Sans.
Oh, you're a hero. Oh, you are an American hero. That's what that means, right?
That's exactly what that means. Yep. That's yep.
Oh gosh. Oh, that's rough. Well,
Yeah.
bless you for the time spent on
You're welcome.
ridding the world of additional Comic Sans.
I mean, there again, I think we mentioned this before when we talked about Comic Sans before. There are some places that it's appropriate. It does apparently help with people who have dyslexia being able to read and see things easier. But for the rest of us, don't know that it's a great font to use most of the time.
Oh man. All right, Ryan, what is your wish you'd stay home?
I'm going to talk about the British Museum.
Ooh.
Because you can tour the British Museum from home.
Cool.
Yeah. And actually, there's multiple ways that you can tour the British Museum. So they have a blog post, blog.britishmuseum.org, which that's pretty straightforward, that talks about how you can visit the British Museum. So one way is Google Street View. Apparently, you can virtually walk through parts of the museum using Google Street View.
Really?
Yeah, I've heard of that Google's done that for a couple other museums as well, where they've actually gotten permission and you can virtually walk through just like you would do with Street View, which I think is cool. They also have some virtual galleries where you can see particular works and things that they have taken really nice pictures of. They have a behind the scenes museum podcast, so you can find out how they do museum sorts of things.
Wow.
They have digital resources. They have audio tours. They've got a YouTube channel. They've got lots and lots of things where you can see different works. They've collaborated with Google for a lot of the stuff, but there's a whole bunch of lists of things and ways that you can virtually experience the British Museum. Now, I think have we talked about the British Museum on here before? I think we did.
I'm not remembering it, actually.
Oh, then maybe we didn't. But in my head, I think we did. Because you've been to the British Museum.
I don't know if I have. Have I?
Oh, really? Because you've been to London twice, right?
Yes.
The Rosetta Stone is the big major most people would have remember seeing. They have a huge Egyptian exhibit.
Maybe it's possible I've been there. If I was there, it was the first time I went in 2000.
Okay. Which, as we've already discussed on this podcast many times, maybe we were at the British Museum at the same time. Because that was the year I was there too. And probably the same month. It's probably July, I'm thinking. Maybe end of June. I don't remember. But I was not super impressed with the British Museum when I went. But apparently since I went, they've redone it. And everybody else I've talked to has said it was really, really impressive and really, really cool. So this would give me a chance to go check it out virtually before I go back to London whenever I end up doing that and deciding if I want to give the British Museum another try.
That's awesome.
But I think the digital part too that's nice is you can kind of skip through to find the things that you want.
That sounds like your kind of museum experience.
Yeah, that's definitely my kind of museum. All right, so there we go. That's our Wish You'd Stay Home for this week. And that's going to be the end of the content for this week's podcast. We would love it if you would follow us on social media. We are at TimWee Podcast. That's TMWI for Take Me With You Podcast. We are on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
You can also email us at timweepodcast@gmail.com. Send us suggestions of shows we should watch or places that we should talk about, guests we should have on, and tell us which travel show host you would most like to take a trip with.
You can also call us and leave us a voicemail at 406-763-8699, also known as 406 Pod Timwee. Please rate and review us so that other people can have an idea of what people think of our podcast, share about us on social media, and subscribe to make sure that you do not miss an episode of our wonderful summer series.
As always, thank you to Beth Reed Miller for the use of her awesome artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Round the Globe. You can listen to Erica's music wherever music is sold or streamed.
That's all we got for this week. So until next week, please remember to take me with you.
Take me with you.
Can we get a sailboat chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe? Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above, and a little love. Oh, the world is out there waiting to explore, and all our troubles here wanting to be ignored. Oh, let's go to India and I